The end of religious control does not signal a war against faith. It signals the return of soul sovereignty. For centuries, systems wrapped themselves in sacred robes, presenting control as devotion. But the energy grid of Earth has changed, and with it, the need for intermediaries between soul and source is dissolving. Humanity is awakening from an inherited trance, not by rejecting the divine, but by reclaiming it within. This shift is not loud or chaotic. It is cellular, emotional, and vibrational. The divine has never been lost. It was simply waiting to be remembered, not in temples, but in the quiet of the heart. The grid of blind devotion is dissolving. For ages, belief systems were supported by energetic structures that reinforced blind obedience. These structures functioned like spiritual scaffolding, necessary only when internal alignment was missing. But now, as global consciousness rises, those grids are losing their magnetic hold. Obedience is giving way to discernment, and blind devotion is being replaced with direct knowing. The dissolution isn't an attack, it's an organic shift. More individuals are stepping out of inherited rituals and asking deeper questions. Spirituality is no longer about fear-based loyalty, but about frequency. And when energy stops flowing into outdated systems, they naturally weaken, not through opposition, but through irrelevance. This shift empowers people to stop outsourcing their connection to something outside of themselves. The structures built to demand belief are becoming less appealing because truth is now being felt, not enforced. The change is not coming from rebellion. It's coming from resonance, and resonance can't be controlled. Truth can no longer be institutionalized. Truth has always existed beyond language, symbols, or ceremony. Yet for centuries, it was wrapped in form, housed in systems, guarded by interpretations, limited by permission. Now something extraordinary is happening. Truth is breaking free of its containers. It is becoming experiential, alive, and unbound. This shift means that books, texts, and teachings are no longer the sole source of revelation. Individuals are remembering truths that align not because they were told, but because they resonate in the body and spirit. Spiritual authority is now internal, not hierarchical, and that inner authority can't be certified or revoked. The sacred no longer belongs to the few. It lives where energy aligns with clarity. It expresses itself in silence, intuition, and presence. Institutions can echo it, but they can no longer monopolize it. Truth, in its purest form, is no longer something one inherits. It is something one embodies. Sacredness is returning to the inner temple. The sacred was never meant to be confined to stone buildings or formal rituals. It was always meant to be discovered in the stillness of breath, in the natural rhythm of the body, and in the undivided moment. As outer forms fade, the inner temple reclaims its light. People are realizing they don't need to be told how to connect. The connection was never lost. It was simply drowned beneath layers of expectation and tradition. Sacredness is rising not in chants, but in spontaneous silence, not in memorized words, but in authentic presence. This return isn't about abandoning external traditions, but about remembering their original purpose, to mirror what is already within. Now that the mirror is clear, the source becomes unmistakable. The altar is the body. The offering is alignment. The temple is wherever breath and spirit meet without fear. The mind is releasing its chains of worship. Mental constructs built on repetition, fear, and reward systems are no longer able to sustain the soul's growth. The mind was trained to worship authority outside of itself, often at the cost of its own inner truth. But those chains are loosening, not through effort, but through clarity. Thoughts are no longer being bound by dogma. A rising wave of consciousness is making it safe to question, explore, and even outgrow inherited belief systems. The fear of punishment is being replaced by the joy of discovery. What once felt dangerous to examine is now an invitation to evolve. The mind is not the enemy of spirit, it is its instrument, and when freed from rigid programming, it becomes a vessel for divine intelligence. The release of control-based worship doesn't create chaos, it creates sovereignty. The soul no longer needs to be ruled. It's learning to lead itself. Divinity is becoming decentralized by light. In past eras, divinity was centralized, mediated by systems, roles, and hierarchies. But now, the light of consciousness is distributing itself through the global grid. Divinity is being decentralized. It is appearing not through a single voice, but through thousands rising in simultaneous remembrance. The sacred is no longer being held in one hand. It is appearing in kitchens, forests, city streets, in anyone tuned to love, truth, and coherence. This distribution of light means that no one person, religion, or tradition can claim ownership. The source is broadcasting on all channels now. This isn't spiritual chaos. It's spiritual democracy. Everyone tuned to their higher frequency becomes a node of divine transmission. No appointment necessary, no robe, no title, just presence. The light is no longer waiting for someone to deliver it. It is simply arriving, through you. The end of fear-based God narratives. The most subtle control is fear disguised as reverence. Stories of eternal punishment, wrathful judgment, and chosen favoritism were never reflections of divine reality. They were reflections of human control. But the collective field can no longer sustain narratives based on spiritual fear. As the energetic blueprint of the planet shifts, fear no longer creates obedience. It creates dissonance. People are turning away from beliefs that diminish their worth or demand their submission. Love is replacing fear as the organizing principle of connection. And love, by nature, does not control, it liberates. The sacred is being rewritten not by rebellion, but by resonance. The stories that once kept people small are being exposed, not by opposition, but by light. Divine love is not a threat. It is an invitation, and humanity is finally accepting it without fear. Your soul was never owned by doctrine. Systems once taught that your soul could be saved, lost, judged, or even purchased, terms borrowed from law, not love. These beliefs trained people to hand over their sovereignty in exchange for promised approval. But no doctrine has ever owned a soul. No spiritual system can override the truth written in your original light. Your essence predates belief. You were divine before you were ever introduced to rules, rituals, or spiritual authorities. The soul doesn't need permission to be whole. It only needs remembrance. And remembrance is rising now, not as defiance, but as quiet realization. The time of spiritual ownership is ending. You are not a member of a belief structure. You are a living facet of cosmic intelligence. The soul doesn't need saving. It needs space to unfold. And as it unfolds, it dissolves everything that once claimed dominion over its light. Prophecy is rewriting itself through frequency. For centuries, prophecy was used as both guide and threat. It forecasted futures based on fear, control, or divine vengeance. But prophecy, like everything, responds to frequency. As the planet rises in vibration, the pathways once predicted no longer apply, because the field itself has changed. Old timelines are dissolving. Predictions born of fear cannot anchor in light. Humanity is not doomed. It is evolving. And evolution renders outdated prophecy inert. New potential timelines are surfacing, not from texts, but from the present moment field created by conscious, coherent beings. The future is no longer fixed. It is being co-authored in real time. The power to foresee no longer belongs to seers alone. It belongs to everyone willing to live in energetic alignment. Prophecy is becoming less about foretelling and more about frequency tuning. The new prophecy is presence. False intermediaries are losing their power. There was a time when access to the divine was filtered through intermediaries, interpreters, gatekeepers, spiritual authorities. These figures became bridges, but over time, some became barriers. The current shift is removing those barriers not by attack, but by awakening. Connection no longer requires translation. As people tune into their inner field, they begin to feel what no one can teach: direct connection. This makes intermediaries obsolete, not because they are wrong, but because they are unnecessary. Divine communication doesn't require someone to speak on your behalf. It simply requires you to listen within. When control-based intermediaries lose relevance, connection expands. There's no need to dismantle them through argument. They dissolve when you outgrow the need. And that is happening now. The sacred has gone wireless. The signal is no longer routed. It's embodied. The Christed light is now within everyone. What was once seen as the embodiment of holiness in a single being is now activating in many. The Christ light, the Buddha essence, the divine spark, it is no longer externalized. It is awakening in every person who chooses love over fear, presence over performance, essence over identity. This light doesn't require a savior to return. It returns through the heart of each who remembers that the sacred doesn't belong to the past. It lives in the now. And it expresses not through grand miracles, but through everyday alignment. Forgiveness, compassion, stillness. These are the new signs of divinity. The light doesn't ask to be worshipped. It asks to be carried. The awakening isn't the return of a person. It's the recognition of a frequency. It's no longer about following the path. It's about becoming it. You are not separate from the divine image. You are its reappearance in form. Heaven has left the sky and entered the heart. Heaven was once imagined as a far-off place, a reward after death, a kingdom in the clouds. But that image is dissolving. Not because heaven doesn't exist, but because it was never separate. What was imagined as a destination is now being realized as a frequency within. This shift is subtle but profound. It changes how people relate to joy, peace, and connection. Heaven is not later. It is now, felt in moments of stillness, in laughter, in unity. The idea that one must earn it is fading, replaced by the truth that one must remember it. Heaven is not a location. It is a level of consciousness. And as more humans align with their inner light, they're bringing heaven to earth, not through force, but through frequency. The divide between mortal and divine is closing, not by climbing up, but by inviting heaven down through presence. The longing for heaven once created distance between self and spirit, life and afterlife, body and soul. But now, that longing is transforming into embodiment. People are no longer just hoping for heaven. They are becoming it in micro moments of compassion, presence, and truth. The more one lives in coherence, the more the myth of someday dissolves. Heaven is no longer the reward. It is the realization that the sacred has always been here, waiting for you to recognize yourself as part of it. Ancient texts are activating new meanings. Sacred writings hold codes, but those codes were often read through lenses of fear, hierarchy, or power. Now, as consciousness expands, the same words are being decoded through new frequencies. The texts haven't changed, but the readers have. And so, new meanings are emerging, hidden in plain sight. People are no longer bound to literal interpretations. They are beginning to see symbols, patterns, and energetic architecture in what was once taken as rigid doctrine. What once was used to separate is now becoming a bridge, not because the text evolved, but because the reader has evolved. This is the awakening of multidimensional literacy. Sacred texts were never meant to bind. They were meant to activate. And now, they are doing just that, not by reinforcing belief, but by awakening direct resonance. The pages are still there, but now, the light between the lines is being seen. As inner awareness deepens, sacred texts begin to function less like manuals and more like mirrors. Passages that once sounded like commands are now heard as invitations. Lines once feared are now felt as thresholds. The encoded wisdom was never meant to be memorized. It was meant to be awakened through resonance. The words haven't changed their shape, but they have changed their vibration in your field. What once divided by interpretation is now uniting through remembrance. Reverence without ritual is the new path. Reverence used to be tied to routine, chants, incense, and kneeling in synchrony. While these rituals once helped anchor the sacred, the energy of this new era no longer requires form to recognize divinity. Reverence has begun to arise not through repetition, but through presence. Now, a quiet walk in nature, an honest conversation, or a moment of pure silence can carry more spiritual weight than an hour of ritual. The soul doesn't respond to performance. It responds to sincerity. The sacred lies in how you meet the moment, not in how you perform tradition. This doesn't mean ritual is wrong. It simply means it is no longer mandatory. For those aligned with their inner light, reverence becomes the natural state of being, not a scheduled behavior. The sacred is no longer dressed in robes. It walks barefoot with you. As this truth spreads, people begin to realize that the highest form of worship is alignment. It doesn't require approval or instruction. It only requires awareness. And in that awareness, ritual may still arise. But this time, it will be chosen, not imposed. The collapse of control is the rise of coherence. When systems fall, it often feels like chaos. But behind the surface noise, something far more intelligent is happening. Coherence is emerging. What once appeared structured, but was rooted in fear, is now unraveling to make space for a deeper, unified energy. Control relied on fragmentation, us versus them, saved versus lost, chosen versus forsaken. But coherence unites through shared essence. As people return to inner truth, a new kind of structure forms, one not imposed from above, but generated from within. This is not rebellion. It is resonant order. The collapse is not an end. It's an alignment. Institutions are not being destroyed. They are being outgrown. Just as a snake sheds its skin, humanity is shedding layers of authority that no longer matches frequency. The form may shake, but the foundation becomes clearer. Coherence isn't loud. It's quiet, radiant, and undeniable. As it grows, it invites, not forces. It inspires, not controls. And as it spreads, more people will feel a strange calm amid the change. That calm is truth making its way to the surface. Unity is no longer being filtered by dogma. For generations, unity was filtered through belief, meaning people could only be united if they agreed. But now, consciousness is rising beyond dogma. Unity is becoming a field of resonance, not a product of identical thinking. Agreement is no longer required for connection. Spiritual alignment is being redefined. You no longer need to pray the same way, speak the same language, or read the same book to feel divine connection with someone. The heart now recognizes the frequency of love, authenticity, and truth, no matter what form it's dressed in. This is the new unity, difference embraced through coherence. Not uniformity, but harmony. Not agreement, but resonance. And with that shift, spiritual community expands beyond walls, labels, and hierarchies. It becomes a field, not a structure. As this unity grows, what once divided now becomes irrelevant. The soul doesn't care about doctrine, it responds to energy. And energy, when clean, always seeks to unify without erasing anyone's uniqueness. This is not spiritual blending. It's spiritual liberation. Your spirit is not a membership to a system. Spirituality is not a subscription service, yet for centuries, it was treated that way, structured by entry points, fees, roles, and systems that offered identity in exchange for belonging. But the human spirit is not a product. It cannot be contained, marketed, or systematized. The soul doesn't need credentials. It needs connection. And now people are leaving systems not in anger, but in realization. They are seeing that their value was never based on external validation. They are choosing truth over tradition, not out of disrespect, but out of recognition. This doesn't mean systems are bad. It means the time of outsourcing worth is ending. The energy now supports inward sovereignty. Your spirit does not require external affiliation to access grace, love, or purpose. It was born with all of that built in. When people realize this, they stop seeking someone to lead them and begin listening to the inner current that never stopped whispering. That whisper is louder now. It doesn't demand. It reminds. And what it reminds you is this: you already belong to everything. The eternal flame can't be branded anymore. For centuries, divine truth was packaged, claimed, and sold under names, flags, and logos. The sacred was branded, made into product, policy, and power. But the eternal flame cannot be marketed. And now, that flame is escaping the cages built around it. The light of awakening is spreading in places untouched by formal religion. In music, in art, in spontaneous connection, in grief and joy alike. It is rising where there is no brand, no claim, no doctrine. Because truth is not something you can own. It is something you embody. This shift is uncomfortable for systems built on exclusivity. But the flame is not asking for permission. It is rewilding itself, flowing where there is resonance, not where there is permission. The source does not need a logo. It needs space to shine through. As the flame spreads, people stop asking what to believe. They start asking what feels true. And that simple question breaks the spell. Because when truth can no longer be bought, it begins to spread for free, freely and unstoppably. Divine sovereignty is the new universal religion. The new age of spirituality is not about new institutions. It's about inner sovereignty. People are no longer asking who to follow. They are remembering how to listen. And in that listening, they are becoming living temples, walking cathedrals of clarity, compassion, and creation. Divine sovereignty means you carry your own access to truth. You don't need a mediator, a translator, or a badge. You need honesty, stillness, willingness. And as more people embody this, the need for control-based systems simply fades away. This isn't spiritual isolation. It's spiritual empowerment. Sovereign beings naturally find each other, not to create new walls, but to share light. Unity in this space happens not by agreement, but by recognition. The soul recognizes itself in another, and in that mirror, the divine becomes visible again.